Hello, my name's Ron Cottrell, President and CEO of Hospice of the Piedmont. On behalf of our board of directors, my 200 coworkers, and more than 200 volunteers, we welcome you to our first community conversation. Our mission at Hospice of the Piedmont is to positively transform the way people view and experience serious illness, death, and grief. We cannot carry out this mission to create a positive transformation without talking to you, our community. Thank you for joining us. At Hospice of the Piedmont, we do three things to carry out this mission. One, we care for patients with serious illness. We do this through our community-based palliative care service called Piedmont Care. Secondly, we work with patients and families to maximize their quality of life as they enter the last chapter of their life, assuring comfort and peace. That's what hospice care is all about. And thirdly, we comfort and counsel those that are grieving after the loss of a loved one. We do this through our Center for Grief and Healing and our Center for Children. Let me quickly say, this work that we do, talking about serious illness, death, and grief, oftentimes makes people very uncomfortable. We understand that. Our aspiration for these community conversations is to help all of us, our community, be more comfortable talking about serious illness, death, and grief. Your presence today means a lot to us, and we are grateful that you have taken the time to have this conversation. Thank you. So this is how the program will work. In just a moment, I will introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Tim Short, and we will have a conversation we hope many of you can relate to. Our conversation will be followed by questions and answers. This is where you come in. In this virtual world we have all gotten accustomed to, we very much want to hear from you and address your questions. You will see a box on your screen to enter your questions and share your comments. Our colleagues are working behind the scenes to receive your questions. When we get to the Q&A portion of the program, Dr. Short and I will be joined by three of our colleagues. Jenny Hunter, who is a hospice nurse and works from our office in Culpeper. Liz Forney, chaplain, who works with patients and families at our Center for Acute Hospice Care and our hospice house. And Mike Williamson, a very skilled and experienced social worker who works with patients and families in their homes, assisted living facilities, and nursing homes. You can submit your questions anytime during the program, and we will do our best to answer your questions, address topics you would like to learn more about. Let me introduce Dr. Tim Short. Dr. Short is the Chief Medical Officer at Hospice of the Piedmont. He also leads our Education Institute. Tim received his undergraduate degree in religious studies at Duke University, where he was also the captain of the soccer team. Tim stayed at Duke for medical school and did his residency at the University of Virginia. After completing his training, he practiced family medicine for more than 20 years in our community, then decided to pursue his interest in palliative care. Tim joined the team at Hospice of the Piedmont for 3 years before moving to Chicago to work with a prominent palliative care physician, Dr. Martha Twaddle, to deepen his experience becoming board certified in palliative care medicine. Tim returned to the area, working at Sentara RMH in Harrisonburg, and then at the University of Virginia for 5 years before returning to Hospice of the Piedmont last spring. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Ron. What we hope to do together today is to break the tyranny of silence that shrouds conversations about serious illness and dying. We'll start this conversation with a story. And with this story, we'd like to explore how we all might be better able to talk about the elephant in the room.
Tim, doing this work, the most powerful way to relate to end-of-life care is through personal experience. And I want to share a story with you about my brother. My brother passed away about 1.5 years ago. At age 53, he went in and got his colonoscopy. Probably a little bit later than he should have at 50, but at 53, It was one of those days that changes your life forever. After his colonoscopy, the doctor came in and said, "We really don't need to wait on the pathology report. You have cancer." The cancer went through his colon wall and invaded his lymph nodes. First treatment was surgery. That was followed by chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and sadly, the cancer continued. Months after his treatment, the cancer spread to his lungs. So he had the spot on the lungs, which again required more treatment. He built this relationship with his oncologist, who I think was a very, very fine doctor. And they developed a codependency to really figure out what to do. My brother was very, very determined. A family man, married, 6 children, and very young in his life. He had a long ways to go to be able to be there for his family. So through this relationship with his oncologist, he wanted to do all that he could. So care continued, but the cancer was still present. Fortunately, through the treatment, it did not spread, and it probably slowed the spread of cancer down. And after time, very sadly, it spread from his colon to his lungs, to his thyroid, then to his liver. And with each step, it was, what else can we do? And through this trusted relationship, it was, let's figure out what options we have that we can offer to you. They continued their efforts with new clinical trials, and he endured. My thinking, and here I am, the CEO of a hospice palliative care organization, is there another voice that needs to be introduced? I read an article once, and it was talking about the collusion between patients and doctors. They work together, there's a tremendous trusted relationship, and they want to work together to, I know, meet my brother's wishes. But I think what happened in the way the system worked, there wasn't a voice in there to give an objective perspective, nor was there the conversation that took place about where this journey ends. After the metastasis to his liver, it went to his brain and went on to get palliative radiation. But after radiation, there was this prognostication that might allow him a couple more months of life. And I will tell you, his wife and family were betting on 2 more months. He did enter hospice care, had a terrible seizure, revoked hospice care, and ended up in the ICU. So here's a good guy in the ICU, riddled with cancer, with still the conversation about the end in sight yet to happen. He was discharged from the ICU to a hospice facility and lived less than 2 weeks and passed away. I do think those 2 weeks under hospice care, he and his family were comforted, knowing that the end was near. But I have to say, I look back with some regret that the planning wasn't done, the conversation about where this journey leads never happened. My sister-in-law and sister, after he passed, were scrambling to put funeral arrangements together. It was a scramble after death happened. And it's not like it snuck up on anyone. This tyranny of silence to talk about death is something we need to deal with. And I wanted to share that story. And Tim, you've been great counsel to me through this journey. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your story, Ron. You know, it hits me in a tender place, as my father died at the same age with 6 children. And we went through some of the same dynamics. I get it. I get that collusion between the family and the doctors. It's a collusion of hope. It's a hope and a clinging to hope and a momentum that the further you go down those roads of treatments, unfortunately, as that disease progressed with Ken, the less and less likely those treatments were going to answer that hope. But I think also at the same time, there's an elephant in the room that everybody's avoiding talking about. I know my family did as well. And I also get that. You want to do everything possible when you have 6 young kids and you're young yourself. But I think addressing that elephant in the room is really important in order to make loving decisions, respectful decisions, the best of decisions, fully informed decisions. Let me talk for a moment about this concept of the elephant in the room. I've sat with a lot of families and addressed the elephant in the room, including my own family. And I've sat with a lot of medical teams. And if you'll forgive my artwork here, after all, I am a physician, and you know how bad we are in handwriting, and I'm a left-handed physician at that. But what I find happens with the elephant in the room is we have a family here in the same room as the elephant and looking past or ignoring or in denial about the elephant in the room. And we as a medical team get asked into the room to talk to them about it. And we come in oftentimes and stand here on the other side of the elephant. And we almost take an, not intentionally, but an antagonistic position, because we stand here and say, don't you guys get it? Can't you see this elephant in the room? Look at it the way we're looking at it. And it doesn't help the family shift from this position of paralysis that they're in, because they're in such a frightening and foreign territory. Or we stand here as a medical team and we talk medical language and we give the family options, ignoring the medical or the elephant in the room. And we say, what do you want to do? And they are a deer in the headlights. They don't know. We can't even agree as a medical team about what's the best way forward for the patient. How can we expect them to get that as well? Really, what we should be doing is coming into the room and standing shoulder to shoulder with the family and looking at the elephant in the room together and saying together, how do we figure the best way forward here? How do we love your dad, your husband? How do we support that love that you have for him as family? And make decisions together, shared decisions going forward that recognize that elephant in the room and plan accordingly. You know, people can only move from paralyzed positions of fear and uncertainty when they have a guide they can trust. Trust starts with listening. These conversations don't just happen. They require intentional planning on both the part of the family and the healthcare team. The greatest fear of families in these times is the fear of the unknown. And these conversations do not increase anxiety or take away hope. They actually reduce fear and anxiety, and they reframe hope in encouraging ways. Initially, Ken's hope was for cure. Later, it became a hope for living longer and living better. But I think if you frame hope in the present moment, you can have hope until your last breath. You know, when Ken and his family got the diagnosis of colon cancer, the medical system said, Ken, here's your disease, and here's the treatment of that disease. Now you build your life around it. And that model worked for a while because that quality of life was preserved and acceptable to Ken and family. But as diseases progress and people become more frail from that disease, or perhaps the treatment of that disease, that model no longer works. You have to turn that model upside down and inside out. You have to shift that model to saying, Ken and family, what's important to you? Now let's build your treatment around that. It's the exact opposite. It's a real significant paradigm shift. So shifting from building life around care to building care around life is an important element to good transition to end-of-life care.
Tim, I don't think that's what happened. And in my case, and that makes perfect sense because the elephant in the room was not addressed.
Yeah.
And this trusted friendship, I will say, between his oncologist. His oncologist wanted to do everything Ken wanted to do.
Yeah.
Keep going. Let's figure it out. Let's keep going forward. That hope was to extend life as far as it could.
Yeah.
But never did it turn, like you just suggested, to say how so his entire life was circled around treatment.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of things that we can point out that might help others find that conversation and find their voice in that conversation. First of all, in these conversations with healthcare team members, words really matter. So words like respect and honor and love and hope and quality of life, they find their way in the center of the conversations, or they should. Not words like risk-benefit ratios, survival percentages, prognostic predictions.
Yeah.
We tend to have these conversations as in medical language, not the language of the family. And I think the family, and that's where I say shifting the paradigm from treatment and medical language to the family's language and what's important is really, really important for a fundamental shift in the paradigm. These decisions by family members, they're made from the head, or from the heart, not from the head. And yet we tend to, in the medical community, present them with a list of choices, with a list of options, and then say, what do you want to do? And so we almost force the framework into this dualistic either or kind of thinking. Either you're going to do this or to go to comfort. And the reality is, it's really more a continuum, and it's really more about loving and about choosing how do you want to spend your remaining time in doing what's important to you and surrounded by who's important to you. There are resources to help with this. Primary care providers, these conversations, they deserve time, they take time, and they're best held with somebody who's trusted. So primary care, long-term relationships, that's a very helpful place to work from or person to work with. So too are the specialty providers. Sometimes it's the oncologist or the heart failure doctor or the neurologist. They often have a primary relationship, and they might have a better view of important information or pieces to the discussion, like prognosis and treatment options. But what we're also finding is palliative care specialists are particularly helpful at this intersection. Palliative care specialists are trained in these difficult conversations. They are also trained in assessing prognosis. And that collusion that you talked about between the patient and their doctors is very real. It's been demonstrated in a number of studies now. And an objective opinion from a palliative doctor in a consultative role can be really, really helpful in just helping you look at hard issues. That's a palliative consult is just like getting a cardiology consult or any other specialty. It's a phone call away. Palliative is different than hospice. Palliative care can be complementary to people pursuing aggressive care, whether that's like Ken's case. chemotherapy or trials or radiation therapy. Palliative care can be alongside of those aggressive treatments. Different from hospice, where hospice is introduced when people are through with it and done with those kinds of aggressive treatments, and they really want to focus more on comfort and symptom-based care. There was a famous study by Temmel over 10 years ago now showing when you added palliative care to traditional oncology care, this was done with cancer patients, it improved the quality of life as perceived by the patients and their families. It improved symptom management. It reduced hospitalizations, and it helped people live longer. This concept of when you have a progressive illness and a life-limiting illness, the best way to help people live longer is to help them live better. And that's exactly the focus of palliative. Interestingly, hospice has been shown to demonstrate the same thing, that when people are placed in hospice and you attend to their symptoms, their emotional needs, their spiritual needs, they live longer because they live better.
Tim, let me ask you, hearing this story and, knowing the journey that my brother went on, one thing I've learned about doing end-of-life care is you don't get do-overs. But if you had a do-over, what would you have suggested in terms of finding that voice, dealing with the elephant in the room? What would you suggest a different path than the one that Ken took?
Well, first of all, I would say, I think it's our task to help people make fully informed decisions. And then we have to be careful not to project our values and the way we would make this happen onto families. For some individuals, going down swinging in an ICU with chemo running through their veins, for them, that's the script they want to write. But for most people, in study after study, that's not how they want to end their lives. Unfortunately, it still is where we're seeing a lot of Americans die, is in ICUs and hospital beds when they want to die at home, surrounded by their families. And I think the first step to help families find a better way is to have the conversations among themselves, to talk about what's important to them. What do you consider to be an acceptable quality of life? What do you consider to be an unacceptable or set a limit to care that's because it's unacceptable in terms of compromising quality of life? And then I think it's to sit down and intentionally ask to have a conversation, what we would call a goals of care conversation with your physicians. If you don't have a physician that's driving the ship that will listen to that, I'd recommend getting a palliative consult to help facilitate that, because they will help by starting with listening. I think when we find that we don't have curative therapies to offer anymore, this emphasis of helping people to live better is a way to help them live longer. So this focus on palliative care in improving quality of life in people with serious illness is the right focus.
Tim, I can remember a conversation I had with Ken and very much shared with him. I have not taken a step in his shoes.
Yeah.
And I can't really fully understand the journey that he's on. And I can remember the words that he shared with me. He said, "Ron, you'll never understand the power of hope until you walk in these shoes." And I think this concept of hope, knowing that he has a life-limiting disease, was too powerful to overcome this conversation about having this end-of-life decision. And I think this bridge that never got built was to deal with that elephant in the room, to talk about the end of life is really the part of his journey.
When we did a poll of over 400 oncologists and asked them, what's the number one reason why you're reluctant to have hard conversations with your patients? The number one reason was their fear of taking away hope from their patients. It's well intended, and that's why I say this is a collusion of hope. Their oncologists want to hope as well and want the best chances and want to do everything possible for patients.
Looking back on it, I don't know if it could have or should have been any different. That being said, I continue to wonder what could have been different. My sister-in-law held on to that hope as much, if not more, than Kim. To the point where getting radiation therapy a couple weeks before he died, they thought that that would give him relief and could get him a couple more months.
Yeah.
She felt like she was, when he had a seizure and needed to be admitted to the ICU, she said, I want my 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
They told me 2 months. And I think we both know prognostication is not an exact science.
Yeah. Yeah.
And without the foundation of understanding where the journey ends, overcame this hope. And then when he crashed, it was like a surprise.
Yeah. That this tension that's embedded in Ken's story is covered by a sense of mutual love and respect. You may have wanted your brother to seek a palliative consult earlier, but he and his family and his doctor chose not to do that. And in the end, we as family members, we as healthcare providers, we are not called to impose our views or values on these really challenging decisions. Our task is to help people make fully informed decisions and then to support those decisions. So good for you for doing that for Ken and his family. I think you helped offer them a story that they could live with, their story. It is a story, and I know from having lost my father, again, at the same age, took me years to find peace with that story. And I think offering families the chance to find stories and create stories that they can live with and that offer them peace starts with breaking this silence. And so thank you, Ron, for sharing your story.
Thank you, Tim. I think it's time to transition to hear from you. We do this to have a community conversation. So in this virtual world, you'll see a box on your screen where you can enter your questions. Please put your questions in, and we're going to do our very best to address all of your questions. If you have topics or comments you want us to review, please share that as well. Thank you for listening to our story. This is about finding your voice at the end of life. So please let us know how we can be helpful to you in finding that voice.
Well, while our questions are rolling in here, I'd love to take this opportunity just to ask our panelists, Michael and Liz and Jenny, from your perspective as a social worker, chaplain, nurse, did any of this message or story resonate with you? Liz, could we turn to you as a chaplain first?
Yeah, I was really moved and I resonated deeply with the tension around taking away someone's hope. And so part of what we work to do as spiritual counselors is to maybe offer different ideas about what that hope could be. Instead of length of days, it might be a special occasion. Some people are waiting for a birthday, and maybe we could move the date of celebrating that birthday up. For some people of faith, they're looking for a miracle. And there's a gentle invitation available for knowing that many faith traditions talk about being sown perishable and raised imperishable, that the full miracle is sometimes on the other side of this earthly walk. So it's a way to explore with families, what's their real hope, and very gently and lovingly helping them redefine what that might be.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz. Michael, as a social worker, anything stand out to you?
Absolutely. This story is so familiar to doing this work for so many years, to many folks that I've met, particularly the phrase life around care and moving to care around life really resonated to me. So many people we meet their lives are consumed in a way with the care that they have to, care plans that they try to follow, and all these procedures and medical visits, and it's overwhelming to people. And to move to a system of moving to care around their life and having quality of life often improves people's outcomes kind of dramatically, it seems, and the perspectives is what I mean to say. The perspective's a lot. It can really help families and patients both.
Yeah, very simple concept, but very difficult to execute, isn't it? With all the momentum in the health system. Jenny, as a nurse, anything stand out to you?
Yeah, I'm thinking of two particular patients right now and how families often want to protect their loved ones, especially elderly people. I'll have their sons and daughters come to me and say, don't mention hospice. We don't want her to know that she's on it. And with a dementia patient, that's often appropriate. But with any other kind of disease process, I usually tell them, you know what, they already know. And not talking about them is going to make them more afraid and anxious than if we just talk about it. And so I'm thinking of one particular patient that I saw recently. And after we had managed some symptoms, I asked the patient and her family, would you like to know more about what your final days might look like? And they said, yeah, we really would. And she wanted to know physically what she was going to go through. And once we talked about that, then we could talk about the fun parts of those last days. You know, does she want to have visitors in? Does she want music played? Does she want her dog lying beside her? What room does she want to be in? And it was a really enjoyable conversation that they could kind of, this was a patient that she liked being in control. And so she really appreciated being able to control all those aspects and her family knowing about them. The other family I was thinking about is kind of the flip side of that. Elderly woman doesn't like the family dynamics are such that they just don't talk about those kind of things, never have, and it's uncomfortable. So when I was alone with her, I asked her, you know, what do you think is happening? Because she's declining. Do you think things are changing? She looked at me. She said, I'm good. I said, are you? She said, I am. And then she started talking about the weather and other things. And it was her way of saying, you know what? I don't want to go there. Whatever happens, happens. So, yeah, the conversations can go either way. But I think addressing that elephant, walking to the other side of the elephant, like you said, and seeing what they want to do with it is helpful.
Yeah, I think you're raising an important issue here, which is if we're talking about breaking the silence and the tyranny of silence around these conversations, you can't force them. You can't just shatter the silence and force your agenda. You need to talk about this. It's got to be a mutually respectful journey together. I want to turn to our first question, and Ron, this is directed to you.
Okay.
Have you had conversation with your sister-in-law regarding her thoughts about your brother's experience and the decisions along the way?
Not deep conversations. We certainly spent time together at his funeral service and immediately after. We have spent time with, one of his sons who came and visited us. My brother lived in Michigan and came down to Virginia and had some conversation with one of his sons. But no, we haven't. I know she continues to suffer a good deal of grief, and that breaks my heart for her. So again, I don't know if her grief journey would have been any different than if things would have been different up front. But as we said, everybody has to map out their own journey And I think Ken was one who wanted to go down swinging to be there for his family. And I respect that, and I respect those choices that they made. I look back on it with a lot of reflection and a lot of learning, but no, we haven't had a lot of in-depth conversation about it afterwards.
Okay. So there is a silence on both sides of before the loss and after the loss. Sometimes it can continue. Sometimes it's sort of buried under the grief and the loss and just getting one foot in front of the other. And time doesn't heal. It takes effort and intention and an open heart to heal in these kinds of losses. The next question I'm going to address I'll address this one myself. Does Piedmont, Hospice of the Piedmont, provide palliative care to individuals not yet needing hospice care? And we touched on that. We hinted at it in just a little while ago. In that, we have an arm now called Piedmont Care, which is home-based palliative care. And yes, they take care of patients that are not in hospice. They take care of patients that have serious life-limiting illnesses, usually with a life expectancy of a year or 2 or 3. And the focus of palliative care in that setting is on improving quality of life. Palliative specialists are experts in symptom management, so they see people with all kinds of diagnoses and associated symptom burdens, tending to that to improve quality of life. And as we've been talking about, they're also really skilled at these challenging conversations. So they will help families have these conversations upstream well before it might be time to consider hospice. There's lots of living to do with serious illness, just as there's lots of living to do when you're in hospice. So I'd like to turn to another question. And I'm going to address this I'll let the panelists choose on this one. End of life is not just a medical event. Our family dynamics are really challenging. How can your team help us deal with this? And this is one of the beauties. Michael, would you mind starting with that one as a social worker?
Sure, absolutely. We work with families in a way as much as we do with patients, from my perspective. I see family members just as often and work with them in sometimes a counseling role, as does Liz, and actually often our nurses very much as well, really giving a lot of counsel to people. Family members too, helping guide. One of the things we always want to make sure is that people feel in control as much as they can, what we call autonomy. And we want to make sure patients feel that they have the ability to decide what they wish for. And families need a lot of guidance sometimes in that. So we participate with everybody, anybody that wants to be in terms of family involved in those conversations. Does anybody else want to?
Yeah, I don't mind chiming in. I think one of the gifts that we can offer as part of a team is that we're not actually part of that family system. And we know that a lot of the dynamics that have happened because of injuries, pain, intended or unintended. And sitting as a neutral, compassionate presence can begin to bring those to light. And we don't have really any investment in outcome. So we can begin to allow each person to have their voice and maybe even hear one another in a fresh way.
The 2 words that come to mind when I hear that question with challenging families is facilitation and boundaries. Michael and Liz, they know how to talk to people. I can help you with your nausea, but I don't always know those conversations. So it's great that we can have team meetings, and when a patient or family member says, oh man, we got all this stuff going on, I might suggest, how about if I have our social worker and chaplain come with me to the next meeting? You bring in whoever you want, and we can help facilitate that conversation. It makes it a little safer than the family doing it on their own. The other thing that can do is set some boundaries for them, to kind of help them visualize what that might look like and make some suggestions to help those challenges.
Well, I might be the only one in the room here that grew up in a perfect family, but families are messy. And when you put them under stress, you see both the strength and resilience and beauty of families, and you can really see the dysfunction and shattering of families. And that's what we encounter day in and day out. And I think what you're hearing here is this kind of team-based care, family-focused care is the best way to address the complex needs of a patient and their family with serious illness, pre-hospice or with hospice. Thank you. Well, let's go to another question. And this is, do you have a recommendation for an optimal time to introduce a palliative care physician to an oncology patient with progressing disease? This goes back to that TEML study, where the TEML study, again, done about 10 years ago, took patients with cancer and entered them with palliative supportive services at the time of diagnosis. And then they took a control group and followed both groups, one that had palliative support and one that did not, and they just followed them forward for a couple of years. There wasn't any impact on the treatment decisions of what kind of chemo regimen they get, et cetera. They matched them up, and then they followed them forward. And what they found was, as I said earlier, the patients with palliative support lived longer, lived better, stayed out of the hospital, and cost less money to the system as a whole. And it was simply because of this attention on symptom management and for the support of real conversations as well. So my answer would be the sooner the better. Many oncologists are open to a collaborative relationship with palliative doctors. Some of them still see palliative as sort of pre-hospice or the same as hospice, and we're not ready for them yet. But if you're finding yourself walking beside a loved one with cancer and you're worried about symptoms that aren't well controlled, or where are we in this? And let's have a real talk here. That's a good time to ask the oncologist. What do you think about asking your palliative colleague to fold into the care here?
Tim, just a quick thought. I just read this quote earlier today, as a matter of fact. And when someone has a life-limiting diagnosis, the saying was, "It's always too early until it's too late."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, obviously, we believe earlier is better.
Yeah. Somebody asked a related question of how do you find a palliative specialist? And we are really fortunate in this community. We have a fantastic palliative program at UVA, a fantastic palliative program at Sentara Martha Jeff. Hospice of the Piedmont has a home-based, fantastic program called Piedmont Care. Augusta has a robust program. So this whole area is very well equipped with palliative services. Your doctors know us. Your doctors know the palliative providers in the area. That's a good place to start, but Google it. You'll find us readily, as anybody in today's world does. Let's go to another question. This is, what happens once you enter hospice? I was with my father at home when he died. Luckily, his neighbor was a hospice nurse. Jenny, would you mind starting with that? Can you step us through what's it look like when you go into hospice?
Sure. A nurse will come out and admit you. That just means she's going to come and do a little physical, get some information from you. You sign some consents. After that, the team descends upon you, which might feel overwhelming at first. But the nurse, you'll get a team. And the way I explain it to my patients is that you're the captain of the team. So you call all the shots. I'm going to be your nurse, and I'll handle the medical aspects of things, nausea, constipation, pain, all that type of stuff, and be in touch with your doctor. The social worker, Michael, I say they handle everything else. So that's emotional, spiritual, financial, all types of things. And we have a chaplain also that can help you with spiritual needs. And then we have a home health aide. So I let them know up front that you're going to have a whole team of people here. You can use as much or as little of them as you want. From after that, as a nurse, I'll be coming out at least once a week to check on you, see how your symptoms are. We also talk a lot about your goals right at the onset when you sign up for hospice. What is it that you want? Would you rather not have a lot of pain and be alert? Those kind of things, or if there's any, like Liz was saying, events coming up that are important to you.
Let me add, because there was another question about this, and Ron, perhaps you'd like to speak to this, but because the question also was about what about after the death? What kind of support does the surviving family members get from a hospice service?
We have very talented grief and bereavement counselors. And when someone passes, a member of our team will reach out to that family and offer grief support. And that grief support can come in many different forms. It can be one-on-one counseling. It can be group counseling. Our Center for Grief and Healing are very skilled at supporting families after death. There's also times where patients that do not receive services from Hospice of the Piedmont need that grief and bereavement support. And we will welcome anyone that needs that support to take advantage of those services offered by this talented team of counselors. So we'll not only care for patients or family members of patients, but also of community members. And the last thing I'll mention too, we have a Center for Children. And oftentimes children suffering a loss, that's oftentimes from sudden death, patients that are not on hospice, and they need a lot of support. So we have a group of therapists that work specifically with children to meet their needs. The Center for Grief and Healing, the Center for Children are supported by philanthropic support. So we're very blessed in this community to have donations that come in to be able to allow Hospice of the Piedmont to support our community beyond what it is we do in caring for our patients' families specifically.
Thanks, Ron. Michael and Liz, I want to address this next question to you too. Control of symptoms, particularly anxiety, is fundamental to quality of life. How do palliative care physicians address anxiety about pain and other symptoms so that patients are not feeling excess anxiety? Michael, you bridge both in the palliative world and the hospice world. Why don't you start with how do we approach this?
Sure. One of the ways I often phrase it to people in a way that's understandable for people that don't work in the medical field is to say symptoms kind of are circular. So if you're having pain, for example, you're often having anxiety or breathing distress. If you're having anxiety, you might feel your pain in a sharper way. So we want to make sure that we're looking at both and trying to manage all symptoms. Luckily, there's a lot of tools at medical practitioners' disposal, physicians and nurse practitioners and whatnot, to utilize medically. But then we want to look at the family systems, counseling, all sorts of things in order to address all the ways that pain can be experienced. So pain, of course, simply isn't just physical. There's emotional pain, there's spiritual pain, many things. And we want to make sure that we're touching and addressing all those issues. Looking at one without the other is not complete, and it's not closing that circle. So we want to touch on all those things if we can. And if people are experiencing one, we need to try to focus on that with them.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Liz, do you want to add anything?
Sure. In my experience, people often have some anxiety about unresolved family issues, things that they haven't expressed forgiveness for or asked forgiveness for. And that's some of the work that we can do as spiritual counselors. And sometimes people have been told some really scary things about the afterlife. And there's an opportunity there to ask what have they heard? What do they believe? What are some other ways of thinking about that, just to open up some of those things. Sometimes the anxiety is just about feeling like there's no one you can safely say it to. And we become safe people for you to be able to say what needs to get said, to have a sense of peace and comfort and resolution at end of life.
Yeah, this is a great question because I think it illustrates how important it is that we as healthcare team members offer both clinical competence and compassion. And if we're not competent at good symptom management, tending to whether it's anxiety or pain or shortness of breath or sleep disturbance, we can't really get to the more important, deeper, richer aspects of palliative and hospice medicine. Those matters of the heart, those issues that you're touching on, relationships, closures, forgiveness, etc. So it's a great question. I think it also raises the issue of, what's important to people when they're staring down the barrel of mortality. And that's where a lot of this anxiety circles around. What's important to people at the end of life first is comfort. And so this question of anxiety about being uncomfortable is very, very common. Second is control. They want a sense of control of their destiny, and they lose all sense of control often. They come into the hospital setting and all control is yanked away from them, unintentionally, but absolutely. And the third thing that is most important to people staring down the barrel of mortality is they're worried about their family. They are making decisions oftentimes more about their family than about themselves. And their greatest fear, the greatest fear of somebody facing dying, is the fear of abandonment, is the fear of being alone. So this is where anxiety finds its energy in these realms, and why it's important for an interdisciplinary team to approach these complex issues. So I'm going to turn to another question. I see your care team includes a chaplain. Will you be attempting to convert someone who's not religious? What denomination are your chaplains?
Oh, that's a really beautiful question, and the answer is no. We are not in the conversion business. We're really in the caring and compassion business. And so when I enter and meet family and patients, my standard intro is, "Hi, I'm Liz. I'm a chaplain," which means I have to kind of do the whoa. I'm here for your emotional support and your spiritual care, however you define it. All of our chaplains want to meet people where they are and care for them in whatever system of faith or just view of the world they have. We do have good relationships with all of the Catholic parishes. And so if that's a really important thing to have a sacramented end of life, we can make that happen. We also cultivate many interfaith relationships. We have a Jewish chaplain on staff, and we are in conversation with both Buddhist and Imam folks. So if that's your tradition, we will make sure that you're cared for in that way. One of the challenges at end of life is that folks often haven't been able to attend their church, and they've gotten disconnected. So we help that connection happen.
Yeah. Thank you. That's actually a very common concern. And thank you for clarifying that. This is the advantage of being a facilitator. You can take the easy question yourself and then give the hard ones to everybody else. I'm going to open this up to anybody. This is a really good question too. How do you suggest we start these conversations earlier with family members that are often not ready to have them?
I mean, my kids are in their 20s, and we start talking about it now. Of course, it helps that I'm a hospice nurse, but intergenerationally, even with my mom and my kids, her grandkids, we have these conversations. So I think if you think about, we are all dying. We all have that in common, every single one of us. Sometimes humor helps. And so just in the course of a lazy day, it can be brought up. Have you ever thought about what do you think you want to do when you die, Mom? Do you want to be buried? I just thought about that. What do you think? And so I think when we're in a healthy state, that's when we need to start talking about it.
I find many families also fall into that conversation driving home from a funeral from a friend or something like that. You know, something happened to somebody and it prompts you saying, well, if this was me, I wouldn't want this or I would want this. That can be an opportunity to fall into that conversation. I think the other advice I would give, if you're struggling and you feel like we really need to have this conversation, but they're really recalcitrant and avoidant, this is where forms and advanced directives might be helpful. You know, can we just fill out this form? And we all know that the forms themselves don't really translate to impacting care at the end of life. It's the conversations around the form. But sometimes they can be a good facilitator to get a conversation started. And we have a robust, active collaborative right now in our community, the Central Virginia Community for Advanced Care Collaborative. And, you know, there's forms and you can get them online. You can get them at any of the hospitals. You can get them on our website. We use 5 Wishes. It's a beautiful form that can facilitate a little bit more conversation. So can the post form here in Virginia, the more robust advanced care directive, an excellent way to stimulate a conversation. Anybody else want to chime in on that one? We have time for, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I resonate with Jenny's expression and that the posture of curiosity, rather than going at it from sort of a morbid, sober, like, dun, 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 just to be like, I wonder, you know, have you ever thought of? Just in a light, warm, curious way is a great way to open the door.
Right, yeah. Curiosity and humility, I would add, are ways that invite discussion. You know, so and I'll tell you the other thing that I've seen. Moment is for my family has been a few television shows or movies that really speak to the heart. This Is Us. I mean, there are some powerful scenes in there that have prompted my wife and I to go to spaces that, you know, we wouldn't have gone to, otherwise. One more question, and then I'm going to turn back to Ron for some closing comments. And this could be any of you, but Ron, actually, this might be a good one for you to pivot on. What's the difference between different hospices?
Well, we're very proud of being in this community for the past 40 years. We are the only community-based, not-for-profit, and we are governed by a board of trustees who take their role in working with a community asset very, very seriously to assure that it is sustaining. I think the thing that differentiates Hospice of the Piedmont are the things that I mentioned earlier. We go well beyond just caring for our hospice patients, and we care for the community, caring for people that have grief issues, caring for children that wouldn't have a place to turn. There's music by the bedside and massage therapy and pet therapy, things that Hospice of the Piedmont will offer our patients that go above and beyond the traditional delivery of care. So we're very proud of some of the initiatives that we're doing to go beyond simply providing hospice care. And I think that's a differentiation as a not-for-profit provider in our community.
Well, thanks. And I will add to that, we have a robust program for our veterans that is just a beautiful program. We are embarking on a death doula program and training of death doulas as they are able to reach people that don't reach hospices for various reasons. So we really are community looking to care for community. Ron, before you close, I'd just love to take this opportunity to apologize that we couldn't get to all the questions. There were a lot of questions rolling in, and thank you very much for those. And just to say thank you for your engagement. I can tell by the quality of the questions in this room, there's a lot of wisdom in this room and a lot that we have to learn from you, just as we learn every day and have the privilege of learning every day from the families we get to take care of. Ron, would you like to close us?
Well, I simply want to say, what a good conversation. And I want to finish the way I started, by saying thank you. We all know talking about death is uncomfortable. And here you were, listening and engaging to this conversation. It takes some courage to talk about end of life for yourself or for your loved one. It will take many more community conversations to break this tyranny of silence and find our voice at the end of life. We look forward to more conversations. These community conversations events will be held quarterly. Our next one will be in June. We'll send you an email and get the word out to the community in hopes that you'll join us again. This session was recorded and we'll post it on our website if you would like to share it with others. Also, if you'd like to talk to someone, please reach out to us. You can call us at the office at 817-6900, or you can go to our website and click on Contact Us, and we'll be sure to connect with you. I want to say thank you to my coworkers for the work they do every day. I am so fortunate to work with 200 colleagues that are so talented, so committed to serving our patients and families facing serious illness, death, and grief. For all of us at Hospice of the Piedmont, we are grateful to have the privilege of sharing this journey with our patients and families. I want to thank Dr. Short, Jenny, Michael, Liz. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. Also, I want to thank Brandon Sutherland from Wind Technologies, who helped produce this program, and my colleague, Rachel Palm, who coordinated all the details to bring this program to you. We're looking forward to our next community conversation in June. Finally, I will say, Ken, I love you and I miss you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.